Here we go again in the hellish merry-go-round of COVID measures. It's like a roller coaster, but with no going up bit where you can gather yourself, just downhill all the way. Stop the ride. I want to get off. In a week's time, we'll be out of lockdown in England and into tiers 2 and 3. We are being released from prison only to enter an open prison. We're jumping out of the frying pandemic into the fire. In terms of the end of England's national lockdown next week, never has a piece of what should be good news felt like such bad news. It's like being filed with divorce papers on your wedding day. Far from being rewarded for the national lockdown, rewarded for 4 more weeks of self-imposed isolation, untreated other illnesses, and incalculable economic damage, huge swathes of the country are now unlucky enough to be in tier 3. They've been earmarked, of course, for this kind of suffering for many months to come. Now, if tier 3 is the lesser of two evils in relation to a national lockdown, then why did we lock down in the first place? Don't forget, the R rate was coming down and cases were flattening before that mad decision to shut the country down once again. And why, when coming out of lockdown, is the tier system not looser and more generous? Why is it stricter? If national lockdowns work, then surely the tiers would now be more forgiving. It's shocking. Now, I have to accept the idea that our health service must not be overwhelmed at any point is a slam dunk argument. Of course it is. The idea of people literally being turned away from treatment is unthinkable. So let's be clear, this situation is complex and a solution is not easy. So perhaps what we should do is focus on the facts, have a look at what we actually know. Hospitalizations, okay? People going into hospital, that number is nothing like what it was when the virus peaked in April. And even at that time, the NHS never came close to being overwhelmed. We now know that treatment for those unlucky enough to be hospitalised is now so much better, with hundreds coming out of hospital every day. See, we hear a lot about hospital admissions. We don't hear too much about the hundreds and thousands discharged every single week. So whilst a ruthless beady eye must be kept on hospital admissions and, of course, intensive care capacity, now is the time to shift focus to the other damage being done. The loss of life from COVID measures and the scarring of not just our economy, but the very future of this country and the way of life that we previously took for granted are now at stake. Hospitality and retail are just two of so many industries that have been glibly considered collateral damage, a price worth paying to stop this largely non-fatal virus in its tracks. Tens of thousands of pubs and restaurants are now boarded up, with many more to come. And today we're hearing the awful news that the retail giant Arcadia Group, owners of Topshop no less, face administration within days. Where I'm going to get my leggings and glittery miniskirts from now on is anyone's guess. Albert Einstein famously said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, stop the press, folks. Insanity has been government policy since all of this started. So mindful of an already busy NHS, of course it's that time of year, I will make the following reasonable suggestion. I would call this a compromise. Now, forget about tier 1. Okay, that obviously doesn't work. And anyway, the last time I checked tier 1, that's such an elusive fantasy. The only possible candidates I can find are Gotham City, Albert Square, Coronation Street, and a couple of well ventilated rooms in Doctor Who's TARDIS. Okay? It's a fantasy. It ain't going to happen. Forget about tier 1. But conversely, tier 3 exacts far too much damage. And for those regions in the Northwest and the Midlands who have been in an unending, literally it's been going on and on, this lockdown has been happening since March in those areas, tier 3 is tantamount to economic apartheid. The only sensible option is tier 2 for the whole country. Okay, but to be exited as soon as possible, based on hospital admissions as the primary marker. Even Tier 2 must also be seen as an awful compromise. The government must not feel, as they currently do, that these tiers have been signed off by the British public until Easter. Quite the opposite is the case. After Christmas, you can stick your talk of a third national lockdown where the sun doesn't shine. We're not having it. The safety-first approach of this government and its advisors, shoving us into lockdowns at the drop of a hat, is proving quite the opposite of safe. Playing it safe never looked so dangerous. Parliament should legislate to stop a lockdown ever happening again. On a week when the Chancellor announced borrowing of almost £500 billion, a projection of almost 8% unemployment, and a drop in economic growth of 11%, January 2021 is not the time for more measures, it's the time for less. Our new emergency is not a health one, it's an economic one. In the new year, we've got to turn over a new leaf. We've got to change the script and move on as a nation. As a matter of urgency, we've got to protect the vulnerable and get Britain back to work, back to something resembling normality, and back on the road to recovery. And we can do it because this is a great, great country. But the greatness of this place is now something we have to fight for. This is Talk Radio.